Okay, let's talk about the PECS principle in Java. This principle is with respect to the Java generic. So whenever initial developer or developer they are going to learn the Java generic, at that time they feel somehow uncomfortable to understand some complex concept in the generic. So generally, those concept maybe your bounded types, maybe extend and super and a wildcard, bounded wildcard, unbounded wildcard. So this principle PECS is the principle with respect to the Java generic that help us developer to understand the code. Once they understand the code, and after that they can easily write the code. And we also discuss some common use case where this principle help us developer to understand the Java generic code is the very simple way. Let's talk about the PECS. So P stand for producer, E stand for extend, C stand for consumer, S stand for the super. That means producer, extend, consumer, super. That's what the meaning. So this principle PECS simple say, hey, you can just remember the concept of bounded types in generic, and bounded types can be in a two way. One is your bounded type parameter extend, another is a super. So sometime developer sometime confused where I'm going to use extend, where I'm going to use the super for the bounded types. The reason is that this extend keywords and this super keyword already developer have learned in the inheritance. While the Java inheritance, we have learned this keyword extend and this keyword the super. So extend means inheriting, means ki one class going to inherit the property from another class. Similarly, super. This class is going to call a particular function that is same name, but that is available in the super class. Then if you call the same name, they always call the local. So hey, I don't want to call the local method. I want to call the super. So you can super. So due to this, already developer have the concept of inheritance. They already use the concept of extend and super. In the generic, again, the Java language use the same two keyword extend and supers. Somehow, the developer initially was this is not the confusion. Once you are going to heavily use this concept, this is very simple relationship. These all the extend super bounded types are just a relationship between the classes. So for the initial developer who are feel some uncomfortable to understand this extend and super bounded type parameter. Okay, so this principle, simple say, just visualize these two concepts, producer and consumer, because producer and consumer is a concept that we generally know. Producer means a particular entity that's produce some value, right? That produce some value, right? Produce some value. And consumer means a particular entity that's are ready eligible for consume some value, consume some value, right? So here this terminology producer and consumer is very common. We are very familiar what the meaning of producer, producing data, consumer, consuming data. So this principle says just let's map producer extend and consumer super. So the whatever the types you are going to define, and first thing, this types is going to use as a producing value are as a consuming value. So let's talk detail here. What this PECS help us to developer. Why this need to understand this simple principle PECS. Producer, extend, consumer, super. Okay, let's understand the meaning. So let's example producer extend. That means when a generic type is producer sub value, that means we are going to define one type T, or this type T is going to returns a method as a value, or a class has a method that produces a value. So whenever you are defining any generic class, or any generic methods, that's are returning values. That means they are producing value, they are generating value. So this principle suggests let's for producer use the extend keyword as a bounded types parameter. Simple. That means the type parameter is the subtypes of bounded types. Means whatever the types you are deciding here. Okay. So they are returning value, that means all his subtypes. So own types and all his subtypes is known as a producer extend. Right? So here producer extend methods all the subtypes. And that's example. So here example, we have write one class producer. They have one method produce. Now you can say produce as a generic types of T. So T should be, because these methods are returning the value, producing value. So good option T should extend the bounded types whatever. So here extend means just mention here the one types, and this is the going subtypes of all these numbers. That means they return the number or subtypes, that is the number class itself, or its subtypes integer, subtype double, subtype anything long, everything, right? So here producer means bounded types T produce number or value, then we can use the bounded type as a being subtypes is the extend keyword. So simple. This principle says let's understand what the methods, what the classes for the generic types you are writing, those class, those methods, what they are doing. They are consuming value or they are returning value. If they are returning value, simply you can use the extend keyword. That means the subtypes of number, you can say. Let's similarly consumer. So similarly, when generic types is a consumes or a value, or a method take value as a parameter, or class as a method consume value. So you can write any class that are generic types, or these types are receiving value as a parameter, as a method parameter, right? So this scenario, this principle say, hey, let's use the super keyword for the bounded types. That means the type parameter is the super types of the bounded type. Whatever the type defines, they allow all his super types. So, super means super types, and that means they are consumer value. Let's example. So here say class we written. Here writing the one class method consume, they are receiving the value T, types of T. So here T should be super of whatever the types, bounded type, string, number, float, whatever you want. That means they are allowed, we can receive this super, whatever the types, string, and his super classes. Super class may be object, maybe char sequence, maybe any super class. So they allow string as well as his super classes. So that means this is under the consumer, means whatever the types as a generic bounded types you are going to define, and that means your methods are, they are going to consume value, they are going to receive value. So in those scenario you can just place as a super keyword, because your bounded types you are defining as a consumer entity. So hope it's clear. The hit say, hey, just whatever the types you are going to define as a generic, let's think you can use extend for the producer. If your types, whatever the types you're defining, this is going as a return the value or as a produce value. In those scenario, you can use the extend keyword. So here we are going to use the for returning value, we are going to extend keyword. This means ki all the subtypes of his boundary types. And similarly, might be you're going to define the type. That types, if the class is going to consume value, the receive value. In this scenario, you can use this keyword super. A super means all the super types. They are allow all the super types. So notice this extend and super finally come under the relationship of your object. So might be whatever the types were decided, this is my type. So I'm only allow all the subtypes or only super types. So this is known as a producer or consumer. Here notice the data value is going to the produce, come consume. Here going to produce out. So that means we are returning value means all subtype you can return. Receive means we can receive all his super types. This relationship. So here the principle PECS enforce the correct relationship between the types. Whatever the bounded types you define, this principle help us developer to apply the correct relationship. If we apply the correct relationship between the super, between the extend as a bounded type parameter, this help us to avoid preventing compile times error and making your code more readable and maintainable. So overall, the purpose of PECS principle is that developer ensure that they are make a correct relationship between the bounded types. And this, if the developer make the correct relationship, it help us to avoid compile time error in the Java channel. So let's talk some importance. What happened? Let's, if you have a writing one class that's producing value type T, and here you say, hey, T super number. So if you think, be carefully, we have writing methods that return the generic type. For return means they are producing value. So for producer, we say it should be extend. But here say we write somehow the super because these methods are producing value, returning value. So types of this should not be super because it should be producing means extend. This should be extend. So here say we incorrect use super for the producer, which lead the compile time error. By following the PECS principle, we can avoid such mistake and write more robust and understandable code. So whatever the place where you are writing the generic, let's visualize high level. Your methods, your class is designed to receiving the value or returning the value or producing the value. If you are designing a class by producing the value, returning the value, let's producer for extend. Use the extend keyword. Here it should be extend. And similarly, hey, consumer, consuming value. That means we are going to the consume for the super. So this PECS principle help us to avoid compile times error and also help us to developer easily understand where I can use the extend and where I can use the super. Generic guidelines is a simple guidelines. Hey, whatever the generic types you are going to define, so let's think this is the class, that's our method that returns the value or class that produce value. You can use the extend. Simple. Producer, for extend. And if your methods that take value as a parameter are class that consume values, for consumer you can use the super. So this is simple. If your class are receiving the value, you can use the super. If your class producing the value, you can use the extend. This is a simple principle. And this, just if we aware this simple principle, Java generic becomes so simple. And another way you can also visualize this principle: producer and consumer in this way, in and out. So what do you mean? Whenever you are writing any class, producer means they are producing some value, right? They are producing some value. Producing some value. A consumer means consuming some value here. So similarly, like in value and out value. So you can also visualize this way, in and out as well. So whatever the types you are making, here means extend, that means sub, yeah, are in. You can. Similarly, super means just out. You can understand as a your super types similarly. So you can also you can say different angle you can visualize, like in and out are producers and consumer. Simple. Super for out, like and in for extend. Simple one. If you somehow visualize, because this is the in and super are very easily understand concept. Whatever the types and these types, whatever the types you are defining, and these types are going to the whatever the class, these are going to the produce. That means this is the in. That means this is the extend. Okay. R is the subtypes. Or you can say, right. Similarly, super, that means out. That is a super type. So you can just visualize in as a subtypes, out as a super types. So this is a different view, you can say. Some will say in and out, but producers and consumer is very simple. And what the way you are visualize. So whenever you are working with a generic and try to apply the this principle PECS. So what are the steps? So first, what are things? Whatever the class or what are the generic types you are going to use. So let's think, identify whether the generic types is a producers or a consumers of value. So whatever the types you have, these types are going to the produce, are going to the consume. If you identify this class where the generic types are going to the produce, are going to the consume, if you done this identify, then very simple. If this is producer, that means you can extend. If the consumer, that means you can just super. So our objective as a software engineer, we have to visualize, hey, this is the class I'm going to write the generic, but this generic class for the producing value. That means we have to extend. This class is designed for the consuming value. Let's go for the super. Here, bounded types parameter, accordingly, you have to design. So if this is simple rule, producer, extend, consumer, super. At this principle, if you are aware and while writing code, you understand and write maintainable and robust code. Very, very simple principle, because producer and consumer is a very, very common principle. Whenever we learn in the college in its times, producer producing data, consumer consuming data. Here instead of producing, we can say writing in the method. If method return value, that means producing something. Let's use the extend here for those types. And if the writing class is a method that consuming value, that means receiving the value, consumer means you can use the super. So these are the very kind of simple guidelines of practice you follow. Just identify The basic rules just to identify the purpose of your class and the types of value, generic value your method, your class are returning, means producing, or consuming, or your in receiving. Accordingly, you can decide your generic types you are going to extend, or generic types you are going to the apply super. So let's talk some basic common uses. You notice the generic is heavily you can use in the collection framework, because the collection framework are designs are so generic. The collections of object, collections of maybe string, math, string builder, employee, department, anything. So whenever you are working with the collections, many, and at that time, if you are going to design some generic class, a generic types, you have to think this is for the collection that collecting value or producing value. So in this scenario, whenever you are working with a collection, you often need to specify the types of element that contains. And if you look, you can use this PECS principle. Use extend for the producer like a T extend number, and is free. Similarly, super for the consumer like a T supers P. So how decide? Whatever the collections, they are producing the value or they are consuming the value. So what are the methods? The method return value, that may extend, that receive the value, that consume. That's super. So collection framework is heavily good example of the Java generic. And many places, sometime you write the generic code, or sometime you have to maintain the generic code, sometime you have view the generic code. Whenever you read any code like extend, that means you understand this class or methods are responsible to returning the value. And if you receive anywhere the super, that means this method or this class was designed as a generic parameter to receive the value. Simple, as a consumer. And after Java 8, you notice we have a use the functional programming concept like filter, map, reduce, collect, to map, to set. These are the places where you are specify the generic types. So here also in the functional program apparatus, any confusion where I can use the extend or where you can use the super, let's apply this principle. Producer, extend. Consumer, super. Simple way. So this simple principle just sort make a simplicity or familiarity your generic code. Now you feel more comfortable to read the generic code if you keep this principle in the mind. PECS. Maybe you are designing some API. While designing API, maybe you need to specify the types of data being returned or accepted. So if you're designing API that's generic, so if think what the generic types, bounded type would be. So if you are a producer, go with extend, or you can a consumer, go with a super. So this you can say simplify our approach to the generic implementation, generic writing code. Even generics are used the not single types bounded type, maybe multiple bounded type parameter. You can extend and as well as the super. So sometime when we working with a generic that have multiple parameter, you may need to combination of extend plus super to specify the relationship between the type parameter. So those scenario also this principle PECS help us to define the correct relationship between the bounded types parameters. Okay. So let's sometime in the generic there is another word you can say wildcard. So this principle PECS also help us in the wildcard. You know, in a wildcard in a Java generics are represented by this question mark symbol, and there are two types of wildcards. One is the unbounded wildcard. This is not define any kind of a super, or any kind of restriction about the types. But some is the bounded type wildcard. So here wildcard and then say extend T, or wildcard extend super T. So here also, in the case of wildcard bounded types, you can think, you can apply the PECS principle. This principle simply help us to understand, if say question mark extend T, that means producer of T value, use the extend keyword. And this is the super T, that means consumer of T value, just use the super. So just understand, whatever the things extend means producer value. Super means consumer value, means method you're writing receiving the value. So this wildcard concepts you can also view from this principle PECS. You can very easily understand the code and you feel more familiarity with your code, with the generic codes, because you can visualize at a top level. You already identify this class or this method, the purpose of producing value or consuming value. Producing, just go extend. Consuming, just go super. And these are the some you can say practices we have to follow. So first thing, as we just identify, hey, this is the my bounded types and this is the API that is going to produce value, return value. Just go the simple extend for producer, and simply the API or methods or types you are defining, that the kind of generic types our API or methods are going to consume the value consumer. That's go with the super, right, in this way. And bounded types parameter to restrict the parameter, specify the types, and subtypes are specific types. And also, Java 7 and after onward we have a type inferences. So type inferences means our compiler automatically identify the type. So to simplify the code, to make it clear and more readable, you can apply this PECS principle. Just mention, hey, even the compiler is able to automatically identify, because the Java compiler support, hey, type inferences means automatically identify the types for your generic evaluation. So here, best practice is, hey, don't let them compiler identified, but at the problem about the code readability. If your developer reading code, they have a question mark. Hey, here which types are value? This is the producer, this is the consumer, they are returning value, they are consuming value. But if we are specify the extend and the super, that means our code become more readable. Even we are using the type inferences. Just tell them, just write the more readable code. Okay, use the bounds to restrict the type parameter and to specify the types are super types are specific types, right? So these if we use this PECS principle, they can easily help developer to understand the generic code. And once you understand generic code, you write safe and robust code. And if you are writing this code using this principle PECS, keep in mind, you feel comfortable because you know, hey, this is the class, this is the method where the methods are going to return the value. This here by default, you are, hey, this is going to extend. Hey, this method is receiving the value. Let's go for the super. So this make correct relationship. Whatever the bound types you are going to define. Okay, so finally, all are the relations. All are the relations. So whatever the generic types you are going to define, generic types you are going to define. Okay, so these generic types you going to define. Simple rule. If your API is returning the value, means producing the value, that means you are going to produce all is subtypes. All is this types and all is subtypes. Okay. And if your API are receiving the value, that means they are the super. They are means we are super types. So we are the super type. Notice super type means receiving the value. So whatever the types we have, with consuming values means ki all the super types. And you are returning means all is subtype. So this is known as a subtype. Okay, subtype, and this is your super type. Super type. This is your consumer because consuming. This is your producer. That's returning value. That means here you can use extend. Here you can use the super. So super means your super types. Means on the top you are receiving. Consumer means just we are returning the value. That means subtype. So you can visualize producer extend. That means all his subtypes means they are down, going the returning, and on the top means they are, if you receiving the value, that means they are receive the all the super type itself, all the super type this are allowable. So you can say super type means consumer and subtype means producer, because the all the my lower value subtype value I can returns means we can extend. Subtype means inheritance extend, you can say. Super types just consumer and super. So in this way you can visualize. Right now, producer extend means we are all the subtype or method can return the value. So producer means return and consumer means receive. Producer means returning the value and producer means returning the value here and here receiving the value. So consumer means receiving the value, producer means returning the value. Producer stand for the extend and consumer stand for the super. In this way, programming terminology, you can say whatever the types you're going to designing, extend means all the subtypes, super means all the super types. So in this way, we can say this principle PECS just help developer to visualize or view the generic code as a simplified version. Producer and consumer. Because producer and consumer is a very common terminology and we are aware. And this principle just associate. Producer means any methods that returning value you can either extend. And if any methods then receiving consuming the value that's mapped to the S. So this is the meaning of PECS principle. This principle, if we Java developer keep in mind while reading the code of Java generic or writing the Java generic code, they make more feel comfortable and you feel familiar with the code, and familiarity make a simplicity of your code. Okay, so let's feel comfortable with the Java generic if we are aware this PECS principle. Hope it will help you. Thank you.